By 2015, Boko Haram had become infamous worldwide, a group that turned Nigeria's northeast into a battlefield and shocked the world with massacres, mass abductions, and suicide bombings. But behind the black banners and fiery propaganda, a deeper conflict was brewing, not with the Nigerian state, but within the group itself. At the center of it stood Abubakar Shekau, Boko Haram's notorious leader. Erratic, ruthless, and deeply isolationist, Shekau ruled through fear. His methods were extreme even by jihadist standards, executing fellow militants, bombing mosques, and targeting Muslim civilians indiscriminately. For years, his authority went unchallenged. But not everyone inside Boko Haram agreed with him. Tensions had been building for years. Some commanders believed Shekau's leadership was reckless, his obsession with terror, his disregard for Islamic scholars, and his refusal to listen to outside clerics had alienated potential allies and narrowed the group's appeal. While Shekau preached total war, others preferred strategic jihad, focused attacks on military and government targets, not civilian markets or schools. A divide began to form. On one side were those loyal to Shekau, who believed fear was the most effective weapon. On the other side were more pragmatic commanders, influenced by global jihadist movements like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who wanted structure, governance, and long-term survival. What began as whispers in the camps of Borno would soon become a full-scale fracture. In March 2015, Boko Haram pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. The world took notice. For Shekau, it was a chance to elevate his profile to align with a global brand of jihad. He changed the group's name to Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP. But inside, the split deepened. ISIS expected discipline, organization, civil administration in controlled areas. They wanted ISWAP to behave like a state, issuing IDs, collecting taxes, winning hearts and minds. Shekau wasn't interested. He continued to bomb markets, execute Muslims who disagreed with him, and rule with violence. By 2016, ISIS had had enough. From Syria, IS leadership formally dropped recognition of Shekau and installed a new leader, Abu Musab al-Barnawi, the son of Boko Haram's original founder, Muhammad Yusuf. Al-Barnawi represented the opposing vision, less chaotic, more strategic, and willing to build local support. The split was official. Two rival factions now operated in the same territory, Boko Haram under Shekau and ISWAP under al-Barnawi. They weren't just fighting Nigeria anymore. They were now fighting each other. The break wasn't peaceful. Skirmishes broke out across northeastern Nigeria and the Lake Chad region. Fighters defected. Commanders were assassinated. Camps split. In some cases, entire Boko Haram units switched allegiance to ISWAP, bringing weapons, intel, and regional control with them. ISWAP began gaining ground, especially around Lake Chad, where they established semi-permanent bases on islands and remote fishing villages. There, they taxed locals, allowed trade, and tried to win over communities that had grown tired of Shekau's brutality. Meanwhile, Shekau's forces retreated deeper into forests like Sambisa, where they continued their campaign of terror, still unpredictable, still dangerous, but increasingly isolated. For the first time, Nigeria faced two insurgencies instead of one. Unlike Shekau's Boko Haram, which often used women and children as suicide bombers, ISWAP avoided mass, civilian targeting. It focused on attacking military bases, checkpoints, and convoys. These were not random strikes. They were calculated, well-planned, and often successful. Between 2018 and 2020, ISWAP carried out dozens of attacks on Nigerian army positions across Borno and Yobe states. In many cases, they overran forward operating bases, looted equipment, and then withdrew before reinforcements could arrive. Their fighters were better trained, their tactics more disciplined, and their propaganda more polished. ISWAP began publishing sleek videos, not just of battle, but of governance, food distribution, Islamic courts, medical care. They were trying to look like a government in waiting. To many observers, it was clear ISWAP was becoming more dangerous than Boko Haram ever was. For the Nigerian government, the rise of ISWAP brought new complications. These weren't wild fighters hiding in the bush. They were embedded in communities, entrenched in terrain, and operating across national borders. Their command structure was resilient. Their intel networks were better, and they were receiving occasional directives and perhaps resources from ISIS leaders abroad. Joint operations were launched. The Nigerian army, alongside Chadian and Nigerian forces, began targeting ISWAP island camps and disrupting supply chains. Drones monitored Lake Chad. Airstrikes increased. But ISWAP was agile. When pushed out of one area, they regrouped in another. Meanwhile, Shekau's Boko Haram kept attacking too, mostly in central Borno and Sambisa. Though weakened, his fighters remained unpredictable, and his defiance of both Nigeria and ISIS made him a threat from multiple angles. In May 2021, ISWAP fighters surrounded Shekau's hideout in Sambisa Forest. A tense standoff followed. According to intelligence reports and ISWAP communiques, he detonated a suicide vest strapped to his chest, killing himself and several loyal guards in a final act of defiance. He chose death over capture, not by government forces, but by the very group he once helped inspire. His death was more than symbolic. It shattered the last remnants of Boko Haram's central leadership. In the days that followed, many of his fighters defected to ISWAP. Others fled into hiding. Some continued the fight, fractured and isolated. The man who once brought terror to millions had died alone, deep in the forest, surrounded not by enemies from a state, but by his own ideological offspring. For a moment, it looked like the war had consolidated. But instead of ending the violence, it only reshaped it. ISWAP expanded further, becoming the dominant jihadist force in West Africa. And while it avoided some of Boko Haram's excesses, it remained brutally efficient. Attacks on military posts continued. Cross-border raids increased. Civilians were still displaced. The war didn't end, it simply changed hands. The split within Boko Haram was more than a leadership feud. It was a battle of ideologies, chaos versus structure, shock versus strategy. And in the end, it created something even more dangerous. ISWAP is not just a rebrand of Boko Haram. It's a new entity, with new tactics, new leadership, and a broader agenda. It remains active across Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. It recruits locally, strikes strategically, and adapts constantly. For Nigeria, the battle against extremism didn't end with Shekau's death. It simply entered a new phase, more complex, more calculated, and more deeply entrenched. This is the story of how terror evolves, not always with a bang, sometimes with split. What happened to Boko Haram after Shekau? How did ISWAP consolidate power and what came next? Find out in the next video of this series.